Good morning. Good morning, dear friends. You know the temperature outside is 23 degrees Fahrenheit or -5 degrees Celsius, and there is ice all around, ICE. And I'm more than delighted that you still chose to come here and be part of this conversation. As you can see, our guest, Shashi Tharoor, who even after an unfortunate fracture just a week back, has flown down all the way from India to join us. My heart is so full of gratitude right now, and so let's just keep the heat building up with a short video.
From the University of California at Berkeley.
This is 30 years ago. 1999.
Welcome to A Conversation with History. I'm Harry Kleisler of the Institute of International Studies. Our distinguished guest is Shashi Tharoor.
This is the reality of the colonial experience, and no wonder that the sun never set on the British Empire, because even God couldn't trust the English in the dark. The fact is that India was already Britain's biggest cash cow, the world's biggest purchaser of British goods and exports, and a source of highly paid employment for British civil servants. We literally paid for our own oppression. Soft power is a concept invented by a Harvard academic, Joseph Nye, a friend of mine, and very simply, and I'm really cutting it short because of the time limits here, it's essentially the ability of a country to attract others because of its culture, its political values, its foreign policies. And lots of countries do this. He was writing initially about the States, but we know the Alliance Française is all about French soft power, the British Council, the Beijing Olympics were an exercise in Chinese soft power. The Americans have the Voice of America and the Fulbright scholarships. But the fact is, in fact, that probably Hollywood and MTV and McDonald's have done more for American soft power around the world than any specifically government activity.
For more than a century, the nation state, a political idea that began in Europe, has shaped how we organize the world. For some, it offers a sense of unity, security, and shared purpose. For others, it divides more than it connects. In this Doha Debates Town Hall, in partnership with the Bradford Literature Festival, we're asking, where does national belonging really come from? Is it rooted in shared culture and history? Is it defined by citizenship? Or is it something deeper, beyond the nation entirely? At a time when borders are contested, identities are layered, and loyalties are put to the test, we're exploring whether the nation state is still a meaningful foundation of who we are. And if not, what could come next? On stage with us, we have three guests who see this issue very differently.
The nation state is the basis on which the world has been organized for the last couple of hundred years, particularly this last century, and to my mind, any alternative is likely to be worse.
So that was to give you a glimpse of our speakers across the globe talks, but also a dive into the discussion that we're going to have today around global markets, local policies, local mindset, and also soft power. But in the year 1956, a baby boy was born to an Indian family in London. The family later moved to India, where he graduated from the venerable St. Stephen's College, New Delhi. He then went on to complete his PhD from the Fletcher School of Law at Tufts, together with a master's degree in arts and in law and diplomacy at just the age of 22. This was the youngest at the time in the history of Fletcher School. Well, his family was at this time gearing up to his academic achievements, but then he just started his career at the United Nations in Geneva, where he served for 29 years, rising up to the Under-Secretary General. He was appointed as an executive assistant to Kofi Annan, who happens to be an MIT graduate. He undertook various peacekeeping and refugee operations, including the civil war in Yugoslavia. At the UN, his seminars on anti-Semitism and Islamophobia were amongst the many firsts he contributed in before joining the Indian politics in 2008 as the Minister of State for External Affairs. An author of 26 books and one of the most eloquent speakers in India and abroad, he was also conferred with the Knight of the Legion of Honor, the highest civilian honor in France in 2022. My friends, is none other than our speaker here, Shashi Tharoor, who's sitting right in front of us as our guest. Please welcome him with a huge round of applause.
Hi everyone, thanks so much, and thank you for that lovely introduction, Harry. That's very, very nice of you.
But I just wanted to begin by saying, my God, Shashi, you've been talking since 1999. I mean, you know, I literally had to increase the speed of Professor Chrysler by 1.5 times, and it still didn't make any difference. So how does it feel to have transitioned from 99 to an era of 67?
Well, I've been speaking since a lot before that too, my dear. But yeah, I mean,
I'm glad at least you got the
was
joke.
already reasonably established at the UN, 21 years at the UN by then. And of course, I've been through a lot since. The rest of my UN career still had another 9 years to run, and I ended it by running for and losing the Secretary Generalship of the United Nations, as coming out second in a race of 7 candidates. But given that the others were all foreign ministers, deputy prime ministers, and even a sitting president of Latvia, I didn't do too badly to beat them all and then end up losing to the Korean candidate. But having said all of that, the big transition was not then, it was the transition to Indian politics, which was a huge change in my life. And I must say, I'm slightly puzzled myself to realize that I've won 4 elections, and if I serve out my full term, God willing, I'll serve 20 years in politics, which I never expected when I left the UN in my early 50s. So looking back at all of that, how does it feel? I don't know. I do feel I've tried to make a difference in what I've done, wherever I've been doing it. I don't think I've succeeded every time. Certainly not, but I've tried, and that trying is what I think makes it all worthwhile.
And I guess, you know, at the time you were trying to succeed an MIT graduate, to be precise, Kofi Annan.
A Sloan Fellow.
Yes, exactly.
Woohoo!
Right here in this room. So it's very hard, you know, after you've worked with an MIT graduate to be able to work with anybody else, you know. You just do. But is this your first time at MIT?
No, I think I spoke here many years ago, but it's now lost in the mists of memory. I mean, I've been not that often to Boston since graduating, but when I've come, I remember at least 2 occasions. One was a talk at one of these, I think a smaller conference room than this one, and the other one was I came here to listen to Satyajit Ray when he spoke at MIT.
Oh.
He was in conversation with somebody else. It was about the time that he made Chhatrapati Khiladi, I think, but was soon after that anyway. So those are the 2 occasions I remember. Otherwise, no, I haven't been a frequent visitor to MIT. Good to see you all here.
But definitely, you know, the first time in this room, you know, this is MIT Schwarzman College of Computing, and it's a state-of-the-art room. It's so unique that even food and beverage is strictly prohibited. You know, we are at MIT, we only serve you technology. We're not so good at food.
Well, you get chips anyway.
I'm so sorry, you know, you got hurt. I mean, amidst all that planning, and I was so excited, and I was like, oh. But I heard in the news that you tripped just outside of the parliament after you had crystallized the government for their budget. Is this a normal modus operandi in the corridors of power?
Actually, I hadn't yet made my budget speech. I made my budget speech seated because I already had the injury. No, I was just coming out, to be honest, with the stupid things where, I mean, if it's any use to all of you, never speak on your mobile phone when you're coming downstairs. So I had my bag in one hand, the mobile phone in the other. I wasn't paying attention to the steps or holding on to the banister. I was looking to see if my driver had driven into the compound. So I was actually calling him saying, "Kaha ho tum?" kind of thing. And the next thing the question about me was, "Kaha ho tum?" But anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so glad that that's not the procedure in any parliament, because the next day I saw you went again and criticized them for their investments in infrastructure, and I was really worried about your other leg.
Look, I mean, politicians are always used to shooting themselves in the foot. So, I prefer to say I was putting my foot down. In the wrong place, but still.
So let's build on a little bit on your time with Kofi Annan. Tell us about your time with him and how his values and your time and your American experiences have shaped you. I believe you were still with him when he got the Nobel Prize.
Oh yeah, very much so. So, I mean, the thing is that Kofi was a remarkable man. I don't know how many of you know very much about him. He was a student leader from Ghana in the 50s, came to America, joined the UN as a very young man in Ethiopia, got transferred to New York and Geneva, and at one point he decided he wanted to actually learn about the real world, so he came to Sloan and did his whatever, what do you get at the end of 1 year, a master's or something? Diploma? Whatever, he got that. Then he went back home to Ghana. Like all of us from developing countries, there's always a yearning to be relevant to our own country. And so he went back and he was, for a couple of years, the managing director of Ghana Tourism in the early 70s, decided that that wasn't for him, and he came back to the UN, never left. So he had an astonishing career. He was the first Secretary General, elected Secretary General from the ranks, and that had its plus points because he knew everything about how the organization worked from within. And I thought was really one of the great Secretaries General of the organization. We haven't had too many great ones, but he and Dag Hammarskjöld would probably be the two who stand out amongst the really visionary leaders of the world organization. He was also in some ways rather like an Indian yogi, very deeply anchored within himself, completely immune, at least visibly or audibly, to both pleasure and pressure. At most you get a smile out of him. If he was angry, his muscles on his face would tighten, but he never raised his voice, always spoke in a very soft, gentle, measured tone, self-deprecating humor, very humble, decent human being. I learned enormously from him. Some of his one-liners and his metaphors and proverbs still stay with me. He was wont to dispensing wise advice in these pithy one-liners. And one of them that I found myself using often after all my trials and tribulations in Indian politics was a line he told me that his father had taught him. And this is when he was going through a hellish time. And I was, at that point, seeing I was seeing him many times a day, as it were, and seeing him through some of these problems. And he said to me that his father had said to him, "When the sharks bite you, do not bleed." I said, "Kofi, I don't understand. The sharks bite you, of course you bleed." He said, "Shashi, one day you will understand." And boy, was he right. But the day did come when I was being bitten by every conceivable shark in Indian politics and the Indian media, and it suddenly struck me what Kofi was saying. Don't bleed, meaning don't let them see that they've succeeded in making you suffer. Because that is the satisfaction they want. And when the sharks bite you, do not bleed, means don't let them put you off your stride. So I essentially responded to some of the worst attacks upon me by doubling down on my own work. That Oxford speech you saw was at some of the peak of the nasty attacks on me. And what I'm proud of is that I never gave my critics and enemies the satisfaction of feeling that they never watched me squirm. I was constantly myself in public. Of course, I wasn't leading internally. Human beings are like that, but I never gave them the satisfaction of seeing that. So that was one of the many lessons I learned from Kofi. Another also about criticism was another Ghanaian proverb, but there are similar Indian proverbs like that. And the Ghanaian proverb is roughly along the lines of, don't worry when they throw stones at you, because little boys only throw stones at trees that bear fruit. And there is in Kerala a similar thing about mango trees, and I'm sure there are in other parts of India too. So things like that. He was just a great guy, very wise, extremely good at what his work was, what he did for the world. And when I lost my wife, he came all the way to India and sat with me for 2 or 3 hours on the sofa, sort of just to make me feel his caring. And so that sadly was going to be the last time I saw him alive, because a few years later I got the shocking news that he died. He was the fittest 79-year-old I'd ever known, but he died at 80. And died, as it turns out, he had prophesied his death, which is another bizarre thing, as I said, very much like an Indian yogi. He had told some friends, I will die in my 80th year in my own bed surrounded by my loved ones.
Oh my God.
The only thing that went wrong there was that he died in a hospital bed, but he was surrounded by his loved ones and he was 80. Just an extraordinary human being. Great privilege to have known him.
Such conviction from a UN diplomat.
And you mentioned the Nobel. When he won the Nobel, and this is such a measure of the man, I was the sort of guy on his right hand, so I greeted him when he entered the building. The whole staff were lined up applauding and cheering and so on. And then we got into the lift to go up to the 38th floor where his and my offices were. And instead of sort of, basking in his glory, he asked me how my kids' college applications were going. That's the guy. Just an amazing human being.
I mean, that's so good to know, Shashi. But if we fast forward from then to 2026, do you feel that the UN or the IMF are kind of losing their significance? I mean, apart from IMF having a very problematic abbreviation, I mean, if I was a country and I had to go to IMF, I would literally feel IMF'd.
All right, MIT is liberalizing.
Do you see that these prestigious organizations, which kind of had been laid down to build a better humanitarian process in the world, are losing significance?
They were set up to create effective universal mechanisms for development. And in fact, more than these two, the one organization that has become completely irrelevant, and you can really ask yourself why it still exists anymore, is the World Trade Organization, which was not designed for a world of impulsive tariffs and the weaponizing of trade. It was actually meant to promote free trade. And today, literally no one, even a country like India, has decided to move away from multilateral trading mechanisms and focus entirely on bilateral deals, because that's now the only way forward as far as India is concerned, and that's probably true of very, very many countries. Certainly, Mr. Trump has set the yardstick there, and I think you're seeing that on trade, the WTO is literally irrelevant. The UN looked on the brink of irrelevance until 10 days ago Trump signed that law guaranteeing full funding for the UN. I'll still believe it when the checks arrive, but at least it's a beginning. The Americans will still find various things to withhold. They withhold money for Palestinians, they withhold money for this or that, but by and large, at least the core funding will come now for the UN, so it can breathe a sigh of relief. They had let go already, literally, hundreds of people from different agencies. And if the lack of funding had continued, they would have had to literally lose a larger percentage of their staff than the Washington Post laid off to finance the Millennia documentary.
Oh, so that's very personal for you, right?
But the truth is that the UN is, I think, at the moment all right, and I hope that Mr. Trump will pay dues every year, but at least for this year he's helped them stand back on their feet. The IMF is a curious business, because the IMF, of course, dispenses largely American money. There's also money from other Western countries, European ones in particular. But with America having seemingly withdrawn from the world, from development assistance, humanitarian aid, and so on, I'm just wondering how that's going to work out. The only big IMF loan I've heard about this year is to Pakistan, which seems to be a country America doesn't mind wasting its money in. But I actually don't know of any other major IMF grant.
I mean, I hope that it's not something like being fans of Boston Red Sox, scores don't matter. if you are fans of Red Sox. So I hope it doesn't turn out that way. But you know, so the main discussion of where I'm trying to build up to is around global markets and how we, when we are designing our foreign policies or even economic policies, we have a very domestic, you know, our own privileges to be kept in the forefront kind of mindset. And this is related to actually, we have a class on global markets and national policies, which is taken by Professor Simon Johnson, who's a Nobel laureate in economics, and Luis Videgre, who was a former foreign minister in Mexico. And they talk about this idea of nation states. Do you think that nation states in today's world are sort of an impediment to a broader goal of globalization? Partly because, you know, it has come from the 6th, probably the 17th century in Westphalia,
18th and 19th,
where the first political states were drawn primarily as a reflective measure from long-standing wars. But maybe in this era of AI, it doesn't really hold to find its significance.
Not really. I don't really agree with you there, Nyari. First of all, as far as the nation state is concerned, as I said, as you heard me saying in that video that Nyari showed, I don't think anything better has been invented. The problem is, you know, if you all of you have read any political theory, the old Hobbesian view that the world is essentially like a jungle, it's violent, it's dangerous, somebody will rise to the power to impose his will on others, and then you've got the Lockean view that you do this through institutions, through organizing human relations under the state in ways that actually make it possible to have a decent existence of human beings. And I think that, to be honest, there isn't yet a better formula. You can have multinational empires rather than nation states, that's a different matter, but that too went out of fashion at the beginning of the 20th century with the dissolution of the Austro-Hungarian Empire and the Ottoman Empire at the end of the First World War, and then the end of the British and French empires at the end of the Second World War. And now essentially the nation state is it, there's nothing else left.
But
Now on the question that you asked, Mary, first
But
of all,
I would like to push back a
Yeah.
little bit here, Shashi. You know, if you just look at the numbers, we've had 14 major global recessions since 1870,
Yep.
and I think 5 major even after World War II. And in my opinion, most of these have come from our like poorly designed domestic policies, and then we went on to have you know, a saga of treaties which were like a band-aid, knee-jerk action, in my opinion. Do you think that probably there is there should be an incentive now to look at how we design our foreign or global policies,
Well, first of
keeping
all-
businesses and markets?
First of all, is globalization truly now a universally recognized common good? I'm really not sure, because
But
the
probably that's
backlash-
coming from the idea of nation states.
Yes, the backlash to globalization, which began with the financial crisis of 2008, has only gathered pace. What is Mr. Trump, for example? What is Brexit? What is the rise of half a dozen leaders in Western Europe all about? These are all reactions to globalization. You have in the Western world a large number of people, starting initially from the working classes but spreading upwards, who have been asking, why are we voting for political leaders who are sending our jobs off to Shanghai or Bangalore for that matter? and why don't we keep the jobs here? Secondly, they're asking, why is it that we've created a system where in the name of globalization, we're seeing a lot of people who look different from us, dress different from us, eat differently from us, speak foreign languages on our streets, in our homes, in our schools, in our offices. There is now a sort of backlash of both an economic nature and a cultural backlash, which I think is questioning the premise of your question altogether. Now, there is a different way we can approach your argument, which is to say that in a world of borderless innovation, and as you mentioned AI, I would
Yeah,
go for
yeah.
that, maybe the nation state is an impediment. And I would agree halfway. I would say, yes, the nation state needs to get out of the way of innovation. Just as, for example, India's dramatic transformation in the 1990s in the IT domain was made possible simply because the government and the bureaucracy was clueless about how to regulate it, so they didn't regulate it. And in the course of the 90s, the revolution in IT and also in satellite communications, TV, telecoms, all of that became possible because the nation state didn't come in the way. And so it's a great lesson we've all learned from the Indian experience. The state should get out of the way of innovation. But the state still needs to stand in the way of exploitation. It needs to stand in the way to protect its citizens. It needs to stand in the way to ensure that that the benefits of innovation don't just reach a very small elite, which in fact is what has happened in the West, and particularly in the US. And I would say that the advantage of a nation state ought to be that it brings in regulations, it brings in taxation, it brings in distribution, it brings in institutions and constitutions to protect its citizens. So to my mind, all of those things are indispensable public goods that only the nation state can provide. Now, you can have a different quarrel about nation state, which is that first half of the word, which only the state can provide is really my argument. Whether the state should be a nation state, that is the European concept that a nation state is a group of people, usually of the same ethnicity, same religion, same language, grouped together into a political formation. That's the idea of a nation state, which is not my idea. I believe you can have a state like India, like Russia, like some degree of China, but China is not a good example because they have ironed out these differences. You can have states which incorporate multiple ethnicities, languages, and religions, but where people are organized on the principle of civic nationalism, not on the basis of ethnicity or religion or identity. And I wrote a book, unfortunately it was published during COVID, so it sank without trace, but I would commend it to you because I'm very proud of it. It's called The Battle of Belonging. And the subtitle is On Nationalism, Patriotism, and What It Means to be Indian, which is my fullest description of the argument I've just made. Why civic nationalism is the basis for a viable state that can actually bring real benefits to its people.
And maybe to add to your point, that soft power does come into existence here. You've talked about in one of your TED Talks that, but maybe you said that the soft power was coined or discovered at Harvard.
Yep.
But let me tell you that it may have been coined there, but it's not really practiced there.
What are they? Where are they?
It's more of an MIT thing. We're truly very humble. So tell us something about how you have been able to exercise your soft powers as a diplomat during your India-Africa relationship initiatives or the other rescue operations. Probably from a point to understand, some of us are taking negotiation classes, but it would be really great to know from someone who's used things hands-on.
I tend to believe in the values. You know the whole concept that Joseph now articulated in the early 90s is that what is power? Power is the ability to alter the behavior of others. That is power. I mean, Trump was able to leverage through tariffs his power over various other countries. It was also by decapitating the Venezuelan regime and getting them to do what he wanted them to do. That's power. But that's what's called hard power. That is a power being exercised as muscle. Soft power is the power of attraction. It is of getting people to do what you want them to do, not because you're forcing them or threatening them or muscling them, but because they're attracted to what you stand for, how you behave, how you speak, what values you represent, what policies you follow, and they feel a desire to emulate you or to please you. I'm putting it very simply, but that is the essential difference between hard power and soft power. And certainly in diplomacy, the skill you want to try and use is soft power. I mean, what is diplomacy? They often say it's the art of telling someone to go to hell so nicely that they look forward to the trip. Or they ask for directions. Or they ask for directions.
Did you exercise that?
I tried.
No.
I tried. I mean, so the thing is that in many ways, in diplomacy, you're not ever meant to use hard power. Hard power is what militaries use, not, and some governments like Mr. Trump's do. Soft power is what diplomats are trying to do, negotiators are trying to do. You persuade others to come along and do what you want them to. Yeah, and so the short answer is that is, in a sense, what you try and do through negotiation.
So let's shift our gears a little bit here and move our discussion to India. And you've been sort of a torchbearer of, telling this out. You literally got international, you became a viral sensation overnight when your Oxford debate kind of exploded. And you've constantly mentioned that Britain does owe reparations for all the wrongings that they've done.
I said that Britain owes moral atonement.
Yep,
But
absolutely.
reparations, I also said in the same speech, that any credible amount would not be payable. In fact, subsequent to my speech, or 3-4 years later, there was a professor in London, Professor Ursa Patnaik, who did a calculation that if you did the monetary value of the drain of Indian resources by Britain over 200 years, you would come up to 45 trillion pounds. Now, given that Britain's entire GDP is 3 trillion pounds, then that's 15 years of every single penny being earned in Britain handed over to India. It's never going to happen. So any credible amount is not payable, and any payable amount is not credible. So my argument was, forget about reparations in the financial sense. Though I did say in Oxford, give us £1 a year for the next 200 years as a token reminder of your injustice. But that'll never happen because no finance ministry will be able to process that £1 a year. But I argued instead for moral atonement. And I gave very specific examples.
And in fact, Shashi, so Professor Johnson, Ismoglu, the two professors at MIT Economics, their Nobel-winning idea stands around this, colonial, inclusive versus extractive colonialism. For example, when they colonized America, this was an inclusive style, as opposed to India, Africa, or Jamaica, or Malaysia, which was primarily extractive. But
the short answer with that is it's because these white guys would rather live in America or Australia or even Canada and New Zealand, would rather not.
But he says that it was
permanently
primarily
hot, humid, overpopulated.
Yeah, and that related to kind of health-related issues, which they thought that would be less in the colder.
Australia, more of them were dying of malaria than they found.
But the reason where I'm heading to is how then
In Africa, I meant, sorry. Yeah.
how then in India have we sort of forgotten, or how then in India we have sort of come to this conclusion that Britain is no more as much as an enemy as it's our neighbors, Pakistan, or probably Mughals, when they have probably done more bad to our country. How has our opinion just changed? Is it just because of some work opportunities in Britain, or is it politics?
No, there are many, many factors. I think first of all there is the sense that what's past is past, and you've got to, you can't forget, but you can forgive, and that.
But that should apply to Mughals and our
No,
neighbors as well.
I agree, it should. I'm just telling you that for myself, the argument would be, number one, nobody in Britain today either wants to or has the capacity to do to us what their ancestors did. So we can shrug it off now. Secondly, there is the feeling that we now deal with them as sovereign equals. There is no current hostility. There is no particular fundamental clash of interests between Britain and India that puts us on a collision course. And therefore, we have nothing to lose by dealing with England as equals. Whereas, say, with Pakistan, we do, because Pakistan feels an existential need to bring India down. Ideally, they'd love to break it up the way we broke them up in 1971. And if not, they wanted to, as in that memorable note written by a Pakistani general in the 1970s, we have to bleed India by 1,000 cuts. So since Pakistan has developed an interest in harming India systematically, for no good reason other than the fact of justifying their own existence, then obviously we have a fundamental existential problem with Pakistan. But as far as the Mughals in the past is concerned, I agree with you totally. That is simply the wrong basis for attacking. In fact,
I mean, they are in
the
the
problem
graveyards.
with the dredging up the Mughals and the ancient past is that you're using it as a weapon to bash today's Indian Muslims on the head with, which is disastrous. It is bad in every conceivable way. First of all, it makes no logical sense. Secondly, it does to history of the Mughals what you're not prepared to do to the Brits. Thirdly,
Yeah.
it antagonizes a very significant, in fact, the largest minority in your own country. Now, there are 200 million Muslims in India. If you make even 1% of them an enemy, what is your own security? It's a very stupid thing to do from every conceivable point of view. So to my mind, the answer lies in what I've been talking about. Yes, you can understand the past and put it in its place in the past. But in the present, you've got to be operating the present with an eye to the future. And the future cannot be a divided India or a divisive polity.
Well, so now that we've had a pretty intense discussion, I would like to shift gears again and talk about your creative world, So if you all don't know that Shashi, apart from, authoring 26 books, but he also did stand-up comedy and it's there on Amazon Prime as well. I do have so by the way, this is with Kofi Annan.
Comedians tried a few jokes about unemployed people, but none of them work. That's why they called it a pandemic. Raise your hands, those of you who actually got COVID. Ah, my God. Welcome to the club. But did you know that the full name of COVID-19 is actually nCovid-19? It's the novel coronavirus pandemic of 2019. And someone asked, why did they call it the novel coronavirus? Well, because it's a long story.
So I was a bit curious. So some of us, we are doing our mid-career MBAs here at MIT, and we call it a midlife crisis. So I wonder, like a peacekeeper for probably 30 years, and then a politician who's worked for people, is this some kind of post-traumatic stress disorder venting that you literally joked about COVID, which in my opinion is the most or not the funniest thing.
No, it wasn't a funny thing, and I got it too. In fact, I was in ICU for 24 hours. A serious heart murmur.
I mean, I showed this clip to one of my American friends, and he said, "Oops, Nyari, he's like, this is even more bad than me."
The American friend wasn't a certain Donald, was it?
Irish.
No, actually, it was the very first Jaipur Literary Festival of the British Library in London after COVID. So for 2 years they had suspended the JLF because of COVID, done it online or whatever. And this was the first one. So they asked me as a favor to sort of help end the session on a lighter note, to just do some stand-up. And I had already done one earlier, not on COVID, but well before, for Amazon, I think it was. It was just I did it almost as a dare, because it was at the end of the 2019 elections that it was recorded. It was after the voting and before the counting, which is a very pregnant interregnum when you have no idea what your future is going to hold, and you might feel slightly reckless. After all, I might lose, I may not be back, kind of thing, so let's have fun. So I was invited to do this show, and it was actually at a comedy club in Noida, which was a full house at that time, but they recorded it, and months later they played it on Amazon Prime Time or Prime Video. You can find that went. So that went reasonably well. Though by that time they cut out all my political jokes since Mr. Modi had won. So they decided they weren't going to risk his wrath. And so I had a few rather rude jokes about some of the promises made in the 2019 elections, and I had jokes about the whole Chaukidar business and so on. But anyway, having done this, there was a precedent, and JLF said, "Can you do one for us?" And so I literally thought of those jokes in the spare minutes.
And what was his feedback afterwards?
Very positive. It's still going around, as you found it too. I think
But But you don't know the prompt that I gave, like, you know, most viral comedy or maybe something else.
The lamest comedy, right? Fair enough.
But
Okay.
so you know, you're such a creative person, Shashi, and you know, to me, to be honest, as an author, I look up to you and your craft. Tell us something about your creative, you know, process or understanding. How does that help you in being so eloquent and take up, you know, pretty tough conversations even in the corridors of power?
Well, I've always enjoyed humor, right from my childhood. As a kid, I remember you used to have these dictation lessons to test your spelling. And at my school, I was 11 years old, and the teacher read out a passage from B.G. Woodhouse. And I was the only one sort of chortling throughout writing this thing. I got the spellings right, but at the end of the thing, I went to the teacher and said, "What the book is this from? Who's the author? Where do I get it?" And there were some Woodhouses in the school library, and from then onwards I was hooked. So I always had a weakness for humor, whether it was corny, situational, slapstick, or puns. All of that was there. And then I went to St. Stephen's College, which was notorious for puns. It was literally, I mean, people would start stories at St. Stephen's College saying, "Once upon a time," you know, that kind of thing. So it really was, it's something that we all, and so it just stayed with me from then onwards. Some of it can actually come out spontaneously out of this bad habit. It can be disastrous. I had a very, very good serious discussion on the paradoxes of India at the Asia Society in New York some years ago. And in the course of it, I cracked a silly joke that occurred to me while I was chatting. That has now become my single most watched Instagram reel in history with 58 million views. And I kick myself every day for having cracked that line because it's the thing that I'm most known for now on people on Instagram. Because that's, I mean, I've done well with some other serious comments, 6 million, 8 million, 10 million. 58 million views. And you know what the line was? Yeah, India, one of the paradoxes of India is that you can't kiss in public, but you can piss in public. That's what now I'm known for.
So with that, you know, the conversation from our side come to an end, but I would like to open the floor for Q&A, and I can already see some hands. And probably, Alex, if we could take one question from our online viewers. By the way, we were streaming live on Instagram for our Indian viewers. But let's start. I just saw somebody raise their hand first at the back. Yeah.
First of all, thank you so much, Mr. Tharoor, for making it.
I don't think your mic's working.
Oh, can you hear me?
Oh, that's better.
Awesome. Well, just thank you so much for making it. The question I had was, looking from the outside, Indian politics just seems very messy, dirty, and kind of complicated.
Yeah, all of that's
someone
true.
who's well-intentioned, wants to make an impact in India, comes from a Western education. Do you think there's a path within Indian politics? What's your opinion on what's the best way for us to make a difference?
Well, I'm a poster child for exactly that, right? I mean, when I returned to India at the age of 51, I got into politics, fought my first election in 53. I had lived 34 years of my life outside India. I had never voted in an Indian election because I left India at 19 when the voting age was then 21. It's now 18, but it wasn't then. So I knew nothing of what I was getting into other than the macro view. I had seen the forest but not the trees. I had written about Indian politics, but as a political historian, not as somebody who had actually experienced, who had been there amongst the weeds, as it were. And so it was a very intense crash course in learning the realities. I shed a lot of illusions very quickly. And one of these illusions was that your idealism, your integrity, your sincerity would be noticed and appreciated. On the contrary, they are seen as opportunities to slip the stiletto in between those soft corners of your heart. So it is a very tough world. And you know, I've been through far worse. I mean, I walked through minefields in Bosnia in my UN peacekeeping days. Indian politics is tougher. And I say this with, as somebody who's been shelled, sniped at by snipers in the Yugoslav Civil War. I can't tell you how incredibly difficult it can be, particularly if you're not one of the boys. I came in from the outside. I was entering a field where everybody had been doing nothing else all their lives. The whole idea of somebody doing another profession and coming into politics was almost unheard of. And it wasn't easy. And if you look at all that I've gone through, the false charges, accusations, people even exploiting the death of my wife to make it something to hit me on the head with rather than sharing my grief. Unbelievable. It was just the cruelest field you can imagine. But I stuck it, I gritted my teeth, went through it, and now I'm still standing and still smiling, and I seem to have, more admirers and detractors still at the end of it all. So you really have to have that resilience. That's the first and most important thing. Second, you've got to care enough about the things you want to do in the country. And third, you've got to be sure that you can only do them through politics. Because there are other ways you can make a difference. You can make a difference, for example, with joining the civil services. You're probably young enough to take the UPSC exams. You can do a lot as an IAS officer, probably a lot more in some levels than a politician can, unless the politicians are true visionary who actually imposes new policies. A lot of the stuff comes from down below. The actual execution of how these things are done, how they make a difference, comes from the rules and regulations. Bureaucrats are right in the way they implement them. So it's one way you can make a difference. Another is through NGOs, civil society. There's an awful lot of work happening amongst the ground level, amongst people who are really getting help from those who are not in politics, but who help defend ordinary victims from the excesses and failures of politics. So the NGOs can be amazing. There are also lots of fake NGOs, opportunistic NGOs set up to benefit political families, and so that's all very different. But I would say 90% of the NGOs are genuine. They do some real work with slum women, with children, with disabled people, all sorts of things. And the fourth way you can make a difference short of politics is by being a public commentator, working in think tanks, in policy spaces, writing op-ed columns in newspapers, going on TV, putting up your own YouTube videos, advocating change. Yes, you won't have the satisfaction of being the one who authorizes or implements that change, but you will be the person who's done the thinking and put it forward. So all these things are there. If you say, as I did, well, look, in a democracy, the most useful way to make a difference is to actually be in politics, and therefore you feel you want to do that, go there but have no illusions about all the stuff I told you and about the process. Because as a young person, certainly, you will find yourself up against a lot of people who have family patronage networks. There's a study done that I think of every single Indian MP in 2016, I think the study was, every single Indian MP under 40, there was only one who was not a descendant of a political family. One. So all of that is also something you'll understand. The obstacles, the barriers to getting a ticket, and it's not like America where any individual can run and capture the imagination of the public, as Zoran did. In the parliamentary system, you have to have a party, the party's got to give you a ticket, and to get your way, you'll have to have a majority of people with you. So there's no Obama movement in Indian politics, unless Obama actually built up an entire party and got a majority of legislators elected who supported him. Only then would he have become what he became. It doesn't work that way in India. I mean, America is much easier for an outlier to rise to the top than India.
Yeah, I mean, in the interest of time, maybe two more questions. He is somewhere in the center first and then left. Yeah.
The first hand that went up was this young lady that's had her to this.
Sure.
So Tharoor, thank you. I'm from Bangladesh.
Hi.
And you have always been an example we could look up to. When I went to college in Dhaka, all young students and to be politicians, wanted to be politicians, who looked up to you.
That's so kind of you, thank you.
Yeah, speeches and were motivated. That brings me to another question. You are a diplomat, and right now our former Prime Minister is kept in India, or is in India, and we now just have had a newly elected government in Bangladesh. So what do you think this factor plays in the India-Bangladesh bilateral?
Sure, no, I'll be very honest with you because I'm here to speak frankly. By the way, congratulations on the election. Everybody had fears about it. Everyone thought it would degenerate into violence, disaster, cheating, whatever else. Nothing has gone wrong. International observers are happy with the count and with the process. And even though the Jamaat has predictably complained about the counting, there doesn't seem to be any genuine doubt. 209 for BNP, 68 for Jamaat is what I've seen so far. And I think that both those figures are entirely credible. I have many good friends in Bangladesh, and more or less, if I was gauging the temperature of the public, this is more or less where it was coming out. BNP is a safe pair of hands. Jamaat is a radical alternative. But even many who voted for Jamaat were not voting for them because of their Islamism. They were voting for them despite their Islamism. There were people who said both the mainstream parties, Awami League and BNP, are so completely discredited because that duopoly has sunk our country for 30 years. Therefore, let's vote for a new party. Doesn't matter if they're Islamists. That was kind of the logic. And that's why they got 68, which is 10 times more than they've ever got before. But that's all right. It'll be a strong opposition, and that's what the country, in any democracy, needs. Now, having said all that, you asked the toughest question about Hasina. And I'll tell you, I can answer this only because I'm not in government. I am a private individual, and I can give you a personal view. The personal view is, when you have essentially driven somebody out for fear of her life, when the head of the army has told her, if you don't leave now, you could be killed in 2 hours, and that's when she leaves. And while she's abroad, you sentence her to death in absentia. And then you want her back. You are essentially asking India to return someone to a certain death. Now you tell me, if you were India, what would you do? Is that something that any decent government could ever do? Hasina was a friend. She may have done many, many wrong things. But India has to be grateful, for example, for the fact that we had a tranquil border, that we had a peace-loving country on our what otherwise could have been our soft underbelly, and that the earlier practice of Indian militants coming in, wreaking havoc in places like Assam, Nagaland, Manipur, and then crossing the border and coming back to Bangladesh and seeking refuge. That practice was ended by Hasina, who simply arrested these people and handed them over to India. Now, there are two things here. First of all, you can't reward all that goodness by having her executed from India's point of view. Second, who will ever be your friend if you betray your friend when their own life is at stake? So as an Indian, I would say India cannot responsibly send Hasina back to Bangladesh. Now there is possibly a way out. If our relations with Bangladesh are seriously threatened by this, is to find out if there is a third country. Almost certainly it will be a European one, because in Europe the death penalty is illegal. And therefore, on the grounds of there being a death penalty, ask if a third country could take Hasina and give her refuge so that she would not be an irritant in our relations with Bangladesh. If I were in government, that's the approach I would follow, very discreetly and gently. But I would not force her out of my country. I think you have to be a good friend, otherwise no one would want to be your friend in the future.
Oof. So we do have, we'll take one question online and then one on this side, yeah? Yeah, Alex, if you could read it out.
So this one comes from Anna.
Can you hold it up a little closer? The mic doesn't seem to
Okay,
work.
absolutely. Anagabela Vadi. Keeping in mind today's topic, why do you think India's power government structure currently is very centralized? Do you think there is a future where the power can be better decentralized to local governments? Thank you.
I've been advocating decentralization for quite some time. I think we are too large a country to be run top-down. There are too many people who are too far removed from the central government. And I have even written an article in the Indian Express last week arguing in favor of my bill promoting states reorganization, or a process for it, because too many states are too large as it is. Forget the central government being too centralized. A state government like UP with 280 million people is ungovernable. A collector in some remote district is as disconnected from the state capital as he or she would be from the national capital. So I am entirely in favor of the assumption that we should be more decentralized. I think more and more key development decisions should be taken at the district level and not at even the state level, let alone the central level.
Okay, we have one person in the center. Yeah. And then one last question.
Hi Shashi, thank you so much.
Sure.
I just want to say that for the first time in my life, my father is jealous of me.
Your father is?
Jealous of me that I'm here and he's
Let me take a picture so he's more jealous of you.
So we are a bunch of masters of supply chain students at MIT, and my question is going to be around that. So do you think the world is heading towards de-globalization, or is it like restructuring globalization with industrial networks?
Sorry, just say that again. Re-industrialization, what you said?
Is the world heading towards de-globalization?
De-globalization.
Or is it restructuring of globalization within the trusted network?
Yeah, I think it's more the latter, re-globalization rather than de-globalization. But a lot depends on how far Mr. Trump carries down his path. De-globalization, in a sense, is you can't, pull back the planes, bring down the satellites, cut off all communication, stop the capital flows, and so on very easily. There are too many supply chains have already been built up over 30 odd years that can't suddenly be dismantled. So de-globalization into a world of protected economies in the old sense, say the de-globalized world of say the 1930s, is not possible. But the re-globalization, that is globalization with restrictions and caveats, is I think what we're going to see. As I mentioned in the first question, there is now in India a greater emphasis on bilateral trade agreements than on international ones, right? Multilateral ones. Similarly, there's a greater focus now in many countries on protecting their currencies, protecting their markets, protecting their workers. You're hearing of phrases we never heard before, like friendshoring, nearshoring, instead of the offshoring that was the flavor of globalization. So all of these things would imply, yes, some things won't be rolled back, so globalization will continue, but it won't be the globalization of the heyday of globalization. The heyday of globalization is roughly 1990 to 2008. You can start from 1980, but it had to take some build-up from space. So from about 1990 to about 2008, about 18 years, everything was in favor of globalization. I remember a communist chief minister in Bengal at a function I was keynoting, saying that, we can't stop this. We can't roll it back even if we wanted to. Globalization is here to stay. A communist. So that was the heyday of globalization. Today, I think there still is very much a sense that nothing inevitable, nothing guaranteed, nothing irresistible about it, that you can, in fact, end up with a newer, modified form of globalization.
All right, if you could just be a bit quick.
Sure. Is it on?
No.
I guess not. Probably you can use this.
No, it's
Thank you. Hi, Shashi. My name is Shikha. I'm a MBA student at MIT Sloan. And first of all, I wanted to say, actually, in contrary, my dad thought it was whack that I was more excited to see you than Priyanka Chopra this weekend.
That's a huge compliment.
No, that's a male point of view.
Honestly, you've been such a huge inspiration to me. When I was 15, I grew up here in Massachusetts. My high school global history teacher actually gifted me your book, An Era of Darkness,
Okay.
and that helped me understand British colonialism and India's fight for independence. And then when I was 22, I read your book, Why I'm a Hindu, and that really also helped me understand sort of India and Hinduism in general is a very tolerant, pluralistic sort of religion, and the idea of Hinduism has become very sort of deeply divided today and has these very divisive narratives. My question is, in a political environment where one party has sort of consolidated significant power, and specifically for my generation, the Gen Z of India, we're not really fighting an external empire, but sort of grappling with the internal tensions within our own democracy. And you talked about stuff like this today, media, censoring, blatant Islamophobia, electoral fraud. So how can young Indians fight in a way that strengthens the republic rather than sort of deepens that division? And we're seeing a lot of young, educated Indian talent actually leave India. So what can we really do here?
Very, very difficult question to answer. I mean, obviously, those who leave have made a choice for themselves. And I would never second guess what's right for them. Don't forget, I left when I was 19. I came back more than 3 decades later. So 3.5 decades later almost. And so I would say leave it to individual choice. By the way, I'm more and more struck by how many Indians I meet who've had long innings and careers here but who want to come back. And that's partially also I think, a reflection of what's happened in today's West, where people who look different or worship different or eat different or sound different are being made to feel increasingly unwelcome. So the West is also changing, it's not just India. A lot of things are happening in the world that have become, sadly, how can I put it bluntly, more exclusionary, less accommodative, less inclusive, less tolerant across the world. And India, sadly, is also an example of the kind of exclusionary politics and even social habits that would have been unthinkable to me when I was growing up in Bombay. My parents came from that nationalist generation that were still young at the moment of independence. My dad would have been turning 18 after independence. And they really believed in those ideals of the freedom struggle. I must have had so many friends come home to play, and never once was the religion or caste of anyone ever mentioned in my home. I actually had to find out about caste when somebody asked me what my caste was. I'd never been told. I had to find out about these differences that divided people on religion much later in life, when it became something that featured through communal rights and things like that. So suddenly, from an India where such kind of identification was actively discouraged, where national integration was always promoted and touted, where entertainment tax was waived for movies like Amar Akbar Anthony, that showed, three little toddlers being brought up, separated at that time and being brought up, one by a Hindu, one by a Muslim, one by a Christian, and then reuniting, of course, in adulthood as heroes, fighting back. They were grateful, but the fact that that's what their entertainment tax off, because it was preaching the right values. Today, entertainment tax waiver is given to films that preach hatred against particular groups and minorities. So there's something that has changed in India, in my view, for the worse. But others will say, well, that's because you come from a different generation. This is what we care about today. And who are you to tell us that ours is worse than you? So you always have different points of view. But having said all of that, if you cared enough and you didn't feel that your escape lay in going abroad and having easier life, escaping responsibility for these problems, then this actually should underscore your determination to stay and fight. In any of those capacities I mentioned to the other lady questioner, not necessarily politics, but also through politics, you can work to create a more decent India. In fact, what is the purpose of politics in any country? Politics is about working for a better society, a better vision of your own country, your own society, your own people. That's what politics is or should be. Now, you can have different views about how to get there. You may have a different portrait in your mind of what a better India is, but the better India that you care about is what you are in politics to achieve. You can do that through other professions, as I said. So think about it seriously, and if you feel, yeah, I care enough about India. I could be very comfortable in Massachusetts or wherever, earning a pretty decent salary that will buy me much more than I could get from the same job in India. But I'm willing to give all that up because India matters to me. My now notorious but genuinely felt statement way back in 1990 when I said, India matters to me and I'd like to matter to India. And I did put my feet where my words were by going back and trying to matter. How much I've been able to accomplish is open for others to debate. I have often joked that if I had to write an autobiography, the title might be The Man Who Nearly, because I nearly did a lot of things. I'm not sure how much I actually achieved. But the truth is, nearly is also testifying to the effort you made. And so I leave it to you, to each individual person, to examine their conscience and their motivations. I would never say that choosing to remain here or choosing to privilege your family or your material interests or whatever, your parents, whatever it may be, is wrong. It's your choice, and you have the right to make your choice. But if you come back, there's plenty to do, and I think it's worth doing.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming here. It is such a privilege, honor, delight to hear you, especially live in person. And I would also like to take a moment to thank our sponsors, Sloan Senate, members of the VCPE Club, the SFMBA Speakers Committee, MIT staff, the AV team at the back end, my classmates, and last but definitely not the least, to the lovely audience here. thank you for your time. Yes, we will gather for a selfie, photographs, whatever, and then you are so used to it. But we do have a small gift for you from our MIT community, and I hope you take it back to India and enjoy.
Thank you. Very kind. Thank you. It's been fun seeing you all. Thank you for the kind words as well.
Okay, wait, wait.
So sorry I have to take your seat. I wanted a selfie, so bad.
If there was just a stupid alarm.
No, don't worry, that's fine.
You can all stay in your seats or stand if you like, and I'll turn my chair around. And we can take a selfie.
Yes, absolutely.